It is April 1689. In London, anticipation fills the air as the eyes of the nation turn toward two sisters whose courage still resonates through time. Mary II of England and her sister Anne, Princess of Denmark. Each carried the weight of faith, power, and duty, shaping a monarchy through revolution, union, and the quiet endurance of personal sacrifice. Let us begin with the first, Mary II of England. Mary II of England was born on the 30th of April in the year 1662 at St. James's Palace in Westminster, London. How did this daughter of a Catholic king become a Protestant icon? What inner battles did she face as loyalty to her father clashed with duty to her country? How did her quiet resolve help shape a new era for Britain? Her story begins in a time of royal tension and unfolds through conflict, courage, and sacrifice. Mary was the eldest daughter of James, Duke of York, the future King James II, and his first wife, Anne Hyde. Born during the reign of her uncle, King Charles II, Mary entered a world already brimming with political division. Though both her parents later converted to Roman Catholicism, Mary and her younger sister, Anne, were raised as Protestants by royal command. This made her a symbol of Protestant hope in an increasingly tense religious landscape. Her early years were marked by privilege and pressure, as she remained second in line to the throne after her father. While many royal children lived in the direct gaze of court life, Mary's upbringing at Richmond Palace under the care of Lady Frances Villiers kept her sheltered, yet groomed for a future she could not yet imagine. Mary's childhood was shaped by religious tension, distant parents, and a carefully managed court education. Though she was born into the powerful House of Stuart, her path was anything but carefree. Her father's decision to convert to Roman Catholicism in the late 1660s cast a long shadow over her future. Her mother, Anne Hyde, had quietly converted even earlier, but the reigning king, Charles II, was determined that Mary and her sister Anne would be raised in the Church of England. It was a political decision, and a fateful one. At just a few years old, Mary was moved from the royal court to Richmond Palace. There, under the supervision of Lady Frances Villiers, she was separated from the direct influence of her Catholic parents. Her life at Richmond was one of structure, etiquette, and Anglican devotion. She received private instruction in music, dance, drawing, and the French language, but not in politics or statecraft. Few expected that one day she might rule. Despite the quiet atmosphere of her household, Mary's heart grew deeply emotional and imaginative. Her early letters to her close friend Frances Apsley revealed the depth of her sensitivity, often filled with romantic language and longing. This inner world contrasted with the political reality around her, a nation balancing Protestant identity with a royal family that leaned toward Catholicism. As whispers of instability grew louder across Britain, Mary's childhood remained outwardly calm but inwardly complex. Her future would one day depend on how well she understood both her royal duty and her private beliefs. At just 15 years old, Mary's life changed forever. In the autumn of 1677, she was told she would marry her cousin, William of Orange, a Protestant ruler from the Netherlands and a rising political figure in European affairs. The announcement shocked her. When informed of the match, she wept for days. Though she had little say in the matter, the marriage was seen as a powerful alliance to strengthen Protestant ties in the face of Catholic influence across Europe. William was the son of Mary, Princess Royal's sister to King Charles II, making the couple both cousins and political allies. At first, Charles had preferred a Catholic match for Mary, even considering the French Dauphin. But shifting alliances and growing concern about Catholic succession in Britain led him to accept the Dutch proposal. Mary's father, James the Duke of York, reluctantly agreed, pressured by court politics and public opinion. The wedding took place on the 4th of November in the year 1677 at St. James's Palace. The ceremony was formal and solemn, attended by the royal family and officiated by Bishop Henry Compton. Afterward came the bedding ceremony, a royal tradition designed to confirm the union's legitimacy. Soon after, Mary departed England for her new life in the Netherlands. The voyage was rough, and upon arrival they faced bitter cold, icy roads, and unfamiliar customs. Yet through it all, Mary held her head high. Her spirited nature quickly won over the Dutch public. What began as a tearful separation from home was quietly becoming a test of her strength and destiny. Mary's early years in the Netherlands were filled with quiet challenges. Though warmly received by the Dutch people, her new surroundings were unfamiliar and often isolating. The court in The Hague was colder, stricter, and far less indulgent than the one she had known in England. The Dutch valued modesty, simplicity, and discipline, a stark contrast to the ceremonial grandeur of the English royal household. William, often occupied with military duties and state affairs, was frequently away. Mary, young and newly transplanted, found herself alone in a foreign land. Despite this, she quickly adjusted, bringing her charm and gracious nature into every corner of her new court. Her genuine warmth and strong Protestant identity helped endear her to the Dutch public, who saw in her a symbol of stability and hope. Not long after her arrival, Mary became pregnant, but during a visit to her husband at the fortified town of Breda, she suffered a devastating miscarriage. It would be the first of several. Her repeated bouts of illness, possibly further miscarriages, cast a long shadow over her life and hopes for motherhood. Though she maintained her composure in public, the losses left deep emotional wounds. Still, she remained devoted to William. While others viewed him as cold and distant, Mary saw the strength and purpose behind his silence. Over time, the couple developed a bond rooted in shared faith and mutual respect. Yet beneath that growing closeness, Mary carried a quiet sorrow, the burden of childlessness and the longing for a home that now seemed far away. As Mary settled into life abroad, the situation back home grew more complicated. Her father, James the Duke of York, ascended the throne as King James II in early 1685 after the death of his brother, King Charles II. This placed Mary directly in line for the crown, a Protestant heiress to a now Catholic king. The conflict between her private loyalty and public duty was becoming impossible to ignore. From across the Channel, Mary and William watched with alarm as James pursued deeply unpopular policies. He attempted to expand religious freedom for Catholics and dissenters by suspending acts of Parliament through royal decree. Many Protestants, including Mary herself, viewed these actions as illegal. When she heard of his intentions, she had her chaplain write a pointed letter to the Archbishop of Canterbury, a subtle yet bold challenge to her father's decisions. Tensions grew further when James refused to help the Protestant population in Orange, her husband's territory, after they were attacked by Catholic forces. Mary began to suspect not only her father's intentions, but also his moral compass. Rumors soon reached her that William might be having an affair with Elizabeth Villiers, the daughter of Mary's former governess. One night, Mary caught William leaving Villiers' room, but instead of fury, she chose forgiveness. Whether the meeting was personal or political, she stood by her husband. As England inched closer to crisis, Mary's world was spinning. The birth of her half-brother, James Francis Edward, a Catholic heir, intensified Protestant fears. Some even believed the child was secretly smuggled into the palace. The whispers of conspiracy were rising, and Mary's own role in shaping Britain's future was now inevitable. By the summer of 1688, the storm Mary had long anticipated finally broke. When her father, King James II, forced Anglican ministers to read his declaration of indulgence aloud in churches, granting religious liberties to Catholics and dissenters, the backlash was immediate and intense. Then came the tipping point, the birth of his Catholic son, James Francis Edward. With a male heir now in place, Mary's position as heir presumptive was in jeopardy, and Protestant leaders feared a permanent Catholic dynasty. Behind the scenes, 7 prominent English nobles, later known as the Immortal Seven, reached out to William in the Netherlands. They secretly invited him to sail to England with an army and overthrow the king. William hesitated, but Mary persuaded him that her allegiance was to God, to her country, and to the Protestant cause. She promised not to claim power for herself, but to support him fully as king. In November of 1688, William landed in England. His campaign met little resistance as much of the army and navy defected to his side. James attempted to flee, was captured, then made a second escape, this time successfully, to France. Mary, still in the Netherlands, was torn between grief for her father and relief for her country. In private, she wept. In public, she held firm. The glorious revolution, as it came to be known, was largely bloodless, yet its consequences were profound. For the first time, a reigning English monarch had been deposed without war, and a new political order, one built on parliamentary authority and Protestant faith, was rising. At its center stood Mary, not as a rebel, but as a reluctant but resolute heir to a fractured throne. When Mary arrived in England in early 1689, she stepped into a land forever changed. Her father had fled, the throne sat vacant, and her husband was hailed as a savior. Yet beneath the triumph, Mary carried a storm of emotion. She had supported the removal of her own father, a decision that haunted her even as she stood at the dawn of a new era. The Convention Parliament met to decide who would inherit the crown. Some wanted Mary to rule alone as the rightful heir, but William insisted on joint rule, not as a consort, but as a king in his own right. Mary agreed without hesitation. In her words, she had no ambition for a crown, and she meant it. She had promised to be William's loyal wife, and that vow remained sacred. To her, ruling was duty, not desire. On the 13th of February, Parliament formally offered the crown to William and Mary as joint sovereigns. The Declaration of Right, soon expanded into the Bill of Rights, stated that James had abdicated by fleeing and that the throne had become vacant. It laid out the limits of royal power and the principles of constitutional monarchy. Never again could a monarch suspend laws or raise taxes without Parliament's approval. Mary's coronation came on the 11th of April. She smiled as expected, but her heart was heavy. Her public cheerfulness drew criticism from those who saw it as heartless, but few knew the true cost. Mary had chosen her country over her father, duty over comfort. And from that moment on, her reign would always carry the weight of that choice. On the 11th of April in the year 1689, Mary and William were crowned together in Westminster Abbey. The ceremony was steeped in tradition, but behind the grand display was a monarchy forever altered. For the first time, a king and queen ruled jointly, not by birthright alone, but by parliamentary invitation. It was a new kind of sovereignty, born from revolution rather than inheritance. Because the Archbishop of Canterbury, William Sancroft, refused to recognize the change in monarchy, the Bishop of London, Henry Compton, officiated. Mary, dressed in robes of state, accepted her crown with a composed dignity. Yet both she and William found the ritual hollow. She called it all vanity, while he dismissed it as too popish. They were not there for ceremony, but for principle, to lead a Protestant kingdom under law. Scotland soon followed England's example. The Convention of the Estates declared that James had forfeited the throne by violating the kingdom's laws, and on the 12th of April proclaimed William and Mary as joint sovereigns. But William, with his military experience and political resolve, was granted full executive power in both realms. Mary accepted this without protest. Though crowned equally, their roles were not the same. William took the lead in military and foreign affairs, while Mary supported him and managed courtly duties. Yet even in this division, their reign was marked by mutual respect. The royal couple became a living symbol of constitutional balance, monarchy held in check by law, and power shared between sovereigns. But stability was fragile. Jacobite unrest simmered beneath the surface, and questions of succession remained unresolved. William and Mary had their crowns, but their reign was just beginning. The English Bill of Rights, passed in December of 1689, became the cornerstone of William and Mary's reign. Built upon the earlier Declaration of Right, it reshaped the monarchy's relationship with Parliament and secured civil liberties for generations to come. No longer could a king or queen rule by decree. The days of unchecked royal power were officially over. The bill outlined clear restrictions. The crown could not suspend laws, levy taxes, or raise a standing army without parliamentary approval. It reinforced the rights of subjects to bear arms for defense, protected free elections, and guaranteed freedom of speech within Parliament. For Protestants across Britain, it was a monumental victory, a safeguard against the Catholic absolutism they feared. The act also formalized succession. If William or Mary died without heirs, the crown would pass to Mary's sister, Anne, and her descendants. Any Catholic, or anyone married to a Catholic, was barred from inheriting the throne. These provisions were not just about religion. They were about securing a Protestant future and reinforcing a constitutional system of government. Although Mary rarely involved herself in the political debate, she supported the principles behind the bill. Her role was not in writing laws, but in living them. As queen, she modeled submission to the rule of law and deference to Parliament, a stark contrast to her deposed father. The Bill of Rights marked a turning point in British history. It signaled a new era in which monarchy, religion, and governance would no longer be dictated by divine right, but shaped by law and consent. And Mary stood as its most visible embodiment. Beginning in 1690, Mary found herself ruling alone for extended periods as William left England to lead military campaigns in Ireland and on the continent. Though reluctant at first, she took up the role of regent with resolve. It was a trial by fire, and she quickly proved herself more capable than many had expected. Guided by a 9-member cabinet council, Mary made firm decisions, held her ground against critics, and defended the Protestant settlement with conviction. Privately, she struggled with loneliness. Her husband was abroad, her sister Anne had grown distant, and her court was filled with unfamiliar faces. "I was left among those that were perfect strangers to me," she once wrote. Yet Mary refused to let her emotions cloud her rule. When her uncle, Henry Hyde, the second Earl of Clarendon, was found conspiring to restore her father, she did not hesitate to have him arrested. Her stern approach extended even to her closest relationships. In 1692, she dismissed John Churchill, the first Earl of Marlborough, a powerful nobleman and military commander, for suspected Jacobite sympathies. This action widened the rift between her and Anne, who was deeply loyal to Marlborough and his wife, Sarah. Mary demanded that Anne dismiss Sarah and vacate her court lodging. Anne refused. The sisters' relationship, already strained, was now broken beyond repair. Though critics whispered that Mary ruled in her husband's shadow, her solo regency told a different story. She had the strength to act, the discipline to lead, and the courage to confront betrayal even when it came from her own blood. In William's absence, the crown rested solely on her shoulders, and she bore its weight with unwavering resolve. Mary's relationship with her younger sister Anne had once been filled with affection, but by the early 1690s, it had unraveled into cold silence. The sisters had grown apart over politics, personalities, and above all, loyalty. Anne was deeply attached to Sarah Churchill, a strong-willed and ambitious woman who held enormous influence over her. Mary, disapproving of Sarah's conduct and the political games she played, saw her as a divisive presence. The final break came in 1692, when Mary demanded that Anne dismiss Sarah and leave her lodgings at court. Anne refused. Publicly, it was a clash of wills. Privately, it was a heartbreaking rupture. Mary, usually composed, was deeply hurt. She believed the monarchy required unity, and Anne's stubbornness, in her eyes, was both disrespectful and dangerous. Even after Anne suffered a tragic stillbirth, Mary did not visit her immediately. When she finally did, the meeting ended not in comfort, but in confrontation. From that moment on, the sisters never saw each other again. Their feud played out in whispers at court and bitter letters behind closed doors. Anne allied herself with those critical of Mary's rule, while Mary confided her grief in her private journal. She saw the estrangement as divine punishment for the irregularity of the revolution. Her devout faith offered her little relief from the emotional cost of royal duty. The palace was now a place of silence, not just politically, but personally. Mary carried on, dignified and dutiful. Yet behind every ceremony and proclamation, there lingered the pain of a bond broken. Her crown was heavy not just with power, but with sorrow. At the core of Mary's identity as queen was her deep and unwavering faith. Raised in the Anglican tradition, she viewed religion not merely as a personal conviction, but as a guiding force behind every decision she made. Her daily life was marked by discipline. She attended prayers at least twice a day, read scripture, and often reflected on her responsibilities in her private journal. For Mary, the crown was a divine burden, a duty given by God, not a privilege to be enjoyed. Her reign reflected these values. Mary issued numerous royal proclamations aimed at curbing vice, immorality, and disorder. She championed modesty at court, condemned drunkenness and licentiousness, and supported the enforcement of moral laws throughout the kingdom. While some saw her policies as strict, others praised her for holding the court to a higher standard. She believed that a righteous monarchy could guide the people not only politically, but spiritually. Mary also took a personal interest in the Church of England. Matters of ecclesiastical patronage passed through her hands, and she worked closely with bishops and clergy. After the death of Archbishop John Tillotson in 1694, Mary hoped to appoint Edward Stillingfleet, a bishop known for his theological insight. But William, upon returning from campaign, overruled her and chose Thomas Tennyson instead. Though disappointed, Mary accepted the decision with grace. Even in moments of disagreement, Mary never lost sight of her purpose. She viewed herself as a servant of both kingdom and church, bound to uphold Protestant values, support moral governance, and live as an example of virtue. In a time of turbulence, her inner compass remained steady, grounded in belief and bound by conscience. Beyond policy and politics, Mary helped shape a royal legacy through patronage, charity, and culture. Together with William, she supported projects that reflected their values, institutions of learning, care, and Protestant advancement. Though not a builder of empires in the traditional sense, Mary left her mark through thoughtful initiatives that echoed her quiet strength. One of the most enduring examples was the founding of the College of William and Mary in the colony of Virginia. Chartered in 1693, the college aimed to educate young men in classical learning and religious training, promoting Anglican leadership in the New World. It was a symbol of the monarchy's commitment to moral and intellectual growth far beyond British shores. Mary also championed the Royal Hospital for Seamen at Greenwich. After the Anglo-Dutch victory at the Battle of La Hougue, she supported plans to create a facility that would care for wounded and aging sailors. The hospital would later become one of the most iconic charitable institutions in British history, blending architectural grandeur with humanitarian purpose. In matters of taste and refinement, Mary had a lasting influence as well. She was known for her love of garden design, especially at Het Loo and Hampton Court, where she introduced Dutch styles to English grounds. She also popularized the use of blue and white porcelain, and is even credited with bringing goldfish into royal homes as exotic pets. These efforts revealed a softer, visionary side of Mary, a queen who not only preserved her nation's soul, but also beautified its spaces and strengthened its conscience. Her reign was not just about laws and wars, it was about legacy. In the final months of 1694, Mary's health began to falter. It started with a fever in April, mild at first, but troubling enough for her to miss Sunday church service, something she had not done in 12 years. Though she recovered, it marked the beginning of a subtle decline. As winter approached, she contracted what appeared to be measles. But as the rash spread and her condition worsened, it became clear she was battling smallpox. Despite her illness, Mary remained composed. She quickly sent away anyone who had not previously had the disease, determined not to spread it through the court. Her devotion to others remained unshaken, even as her body grew weaker. Anne, now once again pregnant, sent a heartfelt letter offering to come see her, despite their long estrangement. But the visit was declined by Mary's attendants, citing risk of infection. In the early days of her sickness, there was hope. The rash began to fade, and for a brief moment, her skin appeared smooth, her energy returning. Mary herself said she felt better, but her attendants knew the truth. The rash had turned inward, a sign of the deadliest form of smallpox. Her strength began to vanish. Mary remained prayerful, even joyful, as her final hours approached. She had made peace with her fate, surrounded by the silence of Kensington Palace and the whispers of those who feared what her passing might mean. The kingdom waited in dread. William had not yet returned, and as the year drew to its end, so too did the light of one of England's most resolute queens. Shortly after midnight on the 28th of December in the year 1694, Queen Mary II passed away at Kensington Palace. She was just 32 years old. The smallpox had overwhelmed her, and despite fleeting hopes of recovery, her body could not withstand the ravages of the disease. William, devastated by her death, confided that he had gone from being the happiest to the miserablest creature on earth. Her passing marked not only a personal tragedy, but a profound loss for the entire realm. Mary's body lay in state at Banqueting House in Whitehall, as London grieved through a bitter winter so cold that the River Thames froze. Her funeral on the 5th of March was a solemn, unprecedented occasion. For the first time in English history, members of both Houses of Parliament attended a royal funeral. The composer Henry Purcell created the hauntingly beautiful music for the funeral of Queen Mary, a tribute still remembered centuries later. She was buried in Westminster Abbey, where kings and queens rest side by side. Her legacy, however, lived far beyond her years. Mary had helped redefine the monarchy not as a force of unchecked power, but as a servant to law, faith, and country. She had ruled with integrity, believed in modesty, and sacrificed personal happiness for national duty. Though Jacobites branded her a traitor to her father, the people of England remembered her as a virtuous queen, one who reigned with humility and purpose. From the college she helped found in Virginia to the moral tone she set at court, Mary's quiet strength left its mark. And in history's long memory, her crown still gleams with grace. Let us now turn to another remarkable figure of royal descent. Anne, Queen of Great Britain, was born on the 6th of February in the year 1665 at St. James's Palace in London, England. How did this often overlooked princess become the last monarch of the House of Stuart? What trials shaped her rise to the throne of a newly united kingdom? And behind the royal image, what heartbreaks and battles did she endure in a reign marked by both war and union? Anne entered the world during a time of fierce political and religious turmoil. The daughter of James, Duke of York, later James II, and Anne Hyde, she was born into a family burdened with shifting loyalties and Protestant suspicion. Her uncle, King Charles II, reigned over a court known more for its decadence than stability. Yet little Anne, with her large eyes and solemn face, stood as a symbol of quiet resilience amid uncertainty. As a young girl, Anne faced the hardship of illness, often suffering from weak eyes and ailments that would later impact her health deeply. She was sent abroad for treatment but also for protection, removed from the religious controversies that plagued her father. Raised in the Protestant faith, Anne's future was always a matter of national concern. Her education, mostly conducted by private tutors and influenced by her uncle's court, focused on religion, loyalty, and duty. These early lessons would shape the moral core of her future queenship and prepare her for a destiny no one fully foresaw. Anne's earliest years were spent under the looming shadow of political instability. Though she was born into the House of Stuart, the royal family's future was far from secure. Her father, James, Duke of York, had secretly converted to Catholicism, a fact that stoked fears among England's Protestant majority. Anne's mother, Anne Hyde, came from commoner stock but carried herself with dignity, instilling in her daughters a sense of pride and purpose that transcended their lineage. Tragedy marked Anne's childhood. Her mother died when she was just 6 years old, leaving a void that would never fully heal. Sent to France alongside her elder sister Mary for their health and safety, Anne stayed at the household of her Catholic grandmother, Henrietta Maria, and later with her aunt, the Duchess of Orleans. While Mary seemed to thrive in these unfamiliar surroundings, Anne found the experience lonely and disorienting, often troubled by illness and discomfort. Her return to England was a relief, and her education resumed with vigor. Private tutors instructed her in religion, history, and household management. The prevailing theme was obedience to God, to the Church of England, and to her future husband. Anne became a devoted Protestant, influenced strongly by her friend and governess Sarah Jennings, who would later play an enormous role in her reign. Even as a young girl, Anne displayed a strong will and a remarkable sense of duty. She listened, observed, and quietly prepared for a life few believed she would ever lead. But destiny, shaped by birth and belief, had other plans. Though Anne and Mary were born just 4 years apart, their relationship was never simple. As daughters of James, Duke of York, they shared a royal bloodline, a religious upbringing, and the weight of national expectation. Yet their paths often diverged in ways that left deep emotional scars and lasting tension. As children, Anne and Mary were close companions, especially after their mother's death. But when Mary was married off at 15 to William of Orange and sent to the Netherlands, the bond began to fray. Anne remained in England, growing closer to Sarah Churchill and forging her own political and emotional world. The sisters exchanged letters, but the distance, both physical and ideological, widened as they matured. Matters worsened during the Glorious Revolution. When Mary and William returned to England to take the throne, Anne found herself caught between loyalty to her father and allegiance to the Protestant cause. Though she eventually supported her sister and brother-in-law's rule, the personal cost was enormous. Mary never forgave Anne for what she saw as political betrayal, and Anne resented Mary's coldness and disapproval, particularly of Anne's continued closeness to Sarah Churchill. Their falling out became public, and Anne was even barred from court during Mary's reign. The sisters, once symbols of unity, became divided by faith, ambition, and influence. In a world that demanded loyalty above love, Anne and Mary learned that even sisterhood could not survive the pressures of power. What once was affection turned to rivalry, and the damage left marks that would never truly heal. In the spring of 1683, Anne entered into a marriage that would shape her life but never dominate her rule. Her husband, Prince George of Denmark, was a quiet and modest man, chosen more for politics than passion. The match, arranged by her uncle King Charles II, served to solidify Protestant alliances across Europe during a time of shifting loyalties and continental tension. Prince George, a Lutheran by faith, was seen as a safe, non-threatening choice. His presence in Anne's life brought stability, though not brilliance. They shared a sincere, if understated, affection, a companionship rooted more in trust and mutual comfort than fiery romance. Anne affectionately referred to him as Dear George, and he in turn remained loyally by her side through years of political storms and personal grief. Their marriage was marked by sorrow. Anne became pregnant at least 17 times, but nearly all ended in miscarriage, stillbirth, or infant death. George remained a constant through each tragedy, grieving with her quietly but faithfully. He never sought power for himself, rarely interfered in politics, and was content to support Anne in whatever role she played, whether as princess, sister of a queen, or one day queen herself. Though some mocked George's dull nature, Anne treasured his steady presence. In a court riddled with manipulation and ambition, he was her sanctuary. Their bond, grounded in loyalty and shared suffering, became one of the few emotional anchors in Anne's turbulent life, a reminder that in the world of monarchs, love could sometimes grow not from fire, but from quiet, enduring kindness. Few aspects of Anne's life were as painful or as defining as her experience with motherhood. Between the late 1680s and early 1700s, Anne became pregnant at least 17 times. Each pregnancy was met with cautious hope, but nearly everyone ended in heartbreak. Miscarriages, stillbirths, and infant deaths followed one another in a sorrowful chain that left Anne physically weakened and emotionally drained. Only one child, Prince William, Duke of Gloucester, survived infancy. Born in July of 1689, his birth was greeted with public joy and seen as a hopeful sign for the Protestant succession. But even this hope proved fragile. The young Duke was often ill and suffered from developmental issues, believed to be hydrocephalus. Anne and George adored him, shielding him from court gossip and watching over his every movement. He was, quite literally, their entire world. When William died suddenly in 1700, just days after his 11th birthday, Anne was inconsolable. The loss struck not only at her heart but also at the future of the Protestant line. With no surviving children and her health in decline, Anne found herself increasingly isolated, a queen in waiting without an heir, a mother without a child. These repeated tragedies took their toll. Her body bore the scars of constant pregnancies, and her spirit became increasingly withdrawn. Yet through this sorrow, Anne never lost her sense of duty. The woman who had buried nearly all her children would soon be called upon to lead a kingdom, carrying with her the silent weight of every small life lost along the way. Anne's identity was deeply rooted in her Protestant faith, a conviction that guided her personal choices and political stance throughout her life. Raised within the Church of England and shaped by the religious turmoil of her time, Anne saw Protestantism not only as a spiritual anchor, but as a duty to protect, especially in an age where Catholic monarchies still held vast power in Europe. Her father's conversion to Catholicism had planted early seeds of conflict. Though Anne loved him, she could not follow him in faith. Instead, she grew even more attached to Anglicanism, attending regular services, receiving private instruction, and aligning herself with religious advisors who emphasized loyalty to the English Church. Her friendship with Sarah Churchill also reinforced this stance, as both women held strong Protestant views and resisted any hint of Catholic influence at court. Anne's religious life was not performative, it was deeply sincere. She prayed often, read scripture daily, and viewed her role in monarchy as a sacred trust given by divine will. Her devotions intensified after the losses of her children, and her faith became both a comfort and a cause. She believed England's safety depended on maintaining its Protestant foundation. This commitment shaped her decisions in later political crises, including the Act of Settlement and her wary relationship with Catholic relatives. To Anne, defending her kingdom meant defending its soul, and that soul, in her view, was unquestionably Protestant. It was not merely her belief system, it was the identity she carried into the throne and the lens through which she saw her nation's destiny. For much of her early adult life, Anne's closest companion was Sarah Churchill, a woman of ambition, intellect, and fierce temperament. Their friendship began when both were still young, with Anne granting Sarah rare personal access and the affectionate nickname Mrs. Freeman, while Sarah addressed the princess as Mrs. Morley. It was a bond that defied courtly norms, one built on candor, mutual trust, and a sense of equality seldom afforded in royal circles. But power and politics would strain even this powerful alliance. As Anne ascended the throne, Sarah's influence became unmatched. She was appointed mistress of the robes and keeper of the privy purse, among other roles. Yet with influence came arrogance. Sarah often spoke to Anne with sharpness, assuming her place was secure, even as Anne sought independence from her overbearing guidance. Tensions deepened as political divisions sharpened. Sarah aligned herself with the Whigs, while Anne grew closer to the Tories. Their arguments turned personal, laced with accusations of manipulation, betrayal, and emotional neglect. At the same time, Abigail Masham, a quiet cousin of Sarah, began to rise in Anne's favor. Sarah suspected betrayal, and rumors of scandal swirled around the court. By the early 1700s, their friendship had crumbled. Sarah's letters turned bitter, and Anne distanced herself completely. What had begun as an unshakable alliance had decayed into a cold and public rift. In a court where friendships were as political as any treaty, Anne's fallout with Sarah marked not just the end of a companionship, but a turning point in her personal and political independence. On the 8th of March in the year 1702, Anne received the news that would change her life forever. King William III was dead. With his passing, the crown passed to her, and Anne became Queen of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Though she had long been a royal presence, now she stood alone at the head of a nation, sovereign in her own right. Her accession was met with widespread approval. The public saw Anne as thoroughly English, deeply Protestant, and loyal to the Church of England. Her painful past and personal losses had made her a sympathetic figure, and many hoped she would heal the kingdom's wounds after decades of dynastic tension. On the day of her coronation, her subjects lined the streets, cheering for a monarch who felt more familiar than foreign. Despite suffering from gout and in fragile health, Anne moved quickly to assert herself. She retained trusted advisors, but also began reshaping the court in ways that reflected her values, modesty, tradition, and national unity. Her first speech to Parliament struck a tone of reconciliation, urging lawmakers to put aside party quarrels for the sake of stability and prosperity. Anne's rise marked more than a change in leadership. It was a turning point in British history. A woman who had lost nearly everything, children, allies, physical strength, now held the reins of an empire. Her reign would not be easy, but it began with purpose and promise as she stepped from shadowed grief into the luminous, demanding light of queenship. As Queen Anne began her reign, she stepped into a political arena already charged with tension. The rivalry between the Tories and the Whigs was fierce, and Anne's own sympathies leaned naturally toward the Tories. They supported the Church of England, the monarchy's authority, and traditional order, values that resonated deeply with Anne's upbringing and beliefs. However, the Whigs held significant influence, particularly within the military and financial circles. Their support for war against France in the War of the Spanish Succession made them hard to ignore. Anne found herself in a delicate balancing act, promoting unity while navigating intense partisan pressures. At first, she leaned on moderate Tory leaders like Sidney Godolphin and the Duke of Marlborough, who, despite being married to her former friend Sarah, remained loyal and competent. Behind the scenes, court factions jostled for influence. Patronage appointments became battlegrounds. Loyalty to Anne often clashed with loyalty to party. The Queen, known for her private nature and measured words, now had to publicly manage the storm of ambition swirling around her throne. She often preferred personal loyalty over ideology, rewarding those she trusted. This frustrated many Whigs who expected greater access to power under her rule. Yet Anne's stubbornness, sometimes seen as a flaw, became a shield. She would not be swayed easily, and she remained fiercely committed to her vision of monarchy. The first years of Anne's rule revealed her growing confidence. Though beset by political rivalries and constant court tension, she proved herself not a mere figurehead, but a monarch with resolve, resilience, and remarkable tenacity. The War of the Spanish Succession became one of the defining struggles of Queen Anne's reign. Sparked in 1701 by the death of Charles II of Spain, the war aimed to prevent France from uniting with Spain under one crown. For Anne, the conflict was both a political necessity and a personal burden, demanding decisions that would test her alliances, her patience, and the unity of her kingdom. England joined the Grand Alliance, siding with the Dutch Republic and the Holy Roman Empire against France and Spain. The Duke of Marlborough, Anne's most celebrated general, led England's forces with brilliance, winning decisive victories at Blenheim, Ramillies, Oudenarde, and Malplaquet. These triumphs elevated England's international standing and gave Anne's government cause for celebration. But success abroad came at a cost. War drained the treasury, brought heavy taxation, and stirred unrest at home. The Tories began to question the war's duration and its toll on the common people. Whigs pushed for continued fighting, hoping to curb French power permanently. Anne, though supportive of Marlborough, often grew weary of war's endless demands and the political heat it generated. Meanwhile, debates raged in Parliament, dividing parties and poisoning friendships. The Queen found herself in the crossfire between loyalty to her military heroes and the rising doubts of her ministers. Even her physical health suffered under the weight of these conflicts. Through it all, Anne maintained a steady resolve. She may not have marched on the battlefield, but her leadership was felt behind every treaty, every budget, every solemn prayer for peace. As the war dragged on and political storms battered her court, Queen Anne's personal world began to shrink. Her health, long fragile, grew worse with each passing year. Struggling with gout, painful limbs, and swelling, Anne found movement increasingly difficult. She relied on a wheelchair for court appearances and suffered from near constant discomfort. The queen, who had once ridden horses and enjoyed long walks, now spent most of her time in private chambers, surrounded by medicines and silence. Her physical pain was matched by emotional loneliness. Anne had endured the deaths of many children, the loss of close family, and the slow erosion of once trusted friendships. Her long and bitter falling out with Sarah Churchill left a hollow space in her heart, one that her new favorite, Abigail Masham, tried to fill. Yet few could offer the deep companionship Anne once knew. Her public image changed, too. Critics described her as slow, stubborn, or overly influenced by courtiers. Rumors circulated about her increasing weight and visible suffering. Some even questioned her ability to rule, despite the fact that she continued to make major decisions and attend key meetings. Anne became more withdrawn, more guarded, and more spiritually contemplative. Her letters from this time reflect a woman leaning heavily on faith, searching for peace amid the noise of politics and the ache of the body. Though still queen, Anne often seemed isolated from the world she governed, a monarch encircled by pain, yet still determined to serve her people with quiet strength. In the year 1707, one of the most lasting achievements of Queen Anne's reign took shape, the Act of Union. For centuries, England and Scotland had shared a monarch, but remained two separate kingdoms. Now, through negotiation, pressure, and vision, they were to be united into a single political entity, the Kingdom of Great Britain. The union was far from easy. Many in Scotland feared the loss of independence and the dominance of English interests. Riots broke out in Edinburgh, and fierce debates shook both parliaments. But economic hardship and the promise of shared prosperity pushed Scottish leaders toward agreement. England, for its part, sought to secure the Protestant succession and a stronger front against Catholic France. Queen Anne supported the union strongly. Though she played no direct role in the line-by-line debates, her presence and approval gave the measure royal weight. When the final act passed, Anne became the first monarch of Great Britain, a new title for a new era. A new flag, the Union Jack, was adopted. A single parliament convened in Westminster. Trade expanded, and the British identity slowly began to take root. Though not universally popular at the time, the Act of Union would shape centuries of British history. It laid the groundwork for a global empire and a common British identity that stretched far beyond the island's borders. For Anne, the moment marked both a high point of her reign and a symbol of lasting unity, forged through complexity, compromise, and her quiet but determined leadership. As Queen Anne's health declined and her circle narrowed, court politics grew ever more intense. At the center of this web stood Abigail Masham, a quiet, shrewd, and deeply loyal companion who would become one of the most powerful women in the Queen's inner world. Once a poor cousin of Sarah Churchill, Abigail had risen from modest beginnings to become a royal bedchamber woman. But her influence would soon stretch far beyond silken pillows and whispered comforts. Abigail's closeness to Anne offered the Queen emotional safety and refuge from the turbulence of high politics. Unlike the brash and ambitious Sarah, Abigail was modest and soft-spoken. She listened more than she spoke, a quality Anne came to treasure deeply. Yet behind that gentle demeanor, Abigail played a careful game. With the support of her cousin, Robert Harley, she became a quiet force for Tory interests, countering the Whig influence long championed by the Churchills. Her presence at court stirred resentment among those who once held sway, particularly Sarah, who viewed Abigail as both a traitor and a usurper. The conflict between the two women erupted into public and political scandal. Anne, caught between loyalty and resentment, finally severed ties with Sarah. Abigail became not just a favorite, but a shadow power broker, helping shape appointments, access, and influence behind closed doors. Through Abigail Masham, Anne regained a sense of control over her court, not through spectacle, but through silence, patience, and the bonds of trust that still held sway in a queen's weary heart. As Queen Anne's reign stretched into its later years, one question loomed larger than any other: who would inherit the throne? With no surviving children and no direct Protestant heir, the future of the British crown was filled with uncertainty and danger. The Act of Settlement, passed in 1701, had already named Sophia of Hanover, a Protestant granddaughter of James I, as Anne's legal successor. But not all accepted this quiet line of succession. Many still looked to the exiled James Francis Edward Stuart, known as the Old Pretender, son of James II, and a Catholic by faith. Loyal Jacobites plotted to restore the Stuart line, raising fears of rebellion and civil strife. Anne herself was torn. She had no love for the Jacobite cause, but her own family loyalty made the situation emotionally painful. The Queen grew increasingly anxious about foreign meddling and internal division. Parliament took steps to tighten security, including the Naturalization Act and treason laws to protect the Protestant future. Diplomats worked to build ties with Hanover. Meanwhile, Anne's own relationship with Sophia of Hanover remained distant and complicated, burdened by politics and personality. Every cough, every sign of Anne's worsening health brought renewed urgency. Who would sit on the throne after her? Would Britain face another wave of unrest? In this delicate, high-stakes moment, Anne's silence spoke volumes. The crown's future rested not in grand declarations, but in cautious planning, and in the hope that her chosen path would preserve stability after her reign ended. By the summer of 1714, Queen Anne's health had worsened. Obesity, gout, and constant pain left her unable to walk. She ruled from her bed, signing documents with effort. On the 30th of July, she suffered a stroke. As news of her condition spread, prayers echoed across Britain. In the early hours of the 1st of August, 1714, Anne died at Kensington Palace. She was 49, with her past the last monarch of the House of Stuart. Buried at Westminster Abbey, her reign closed a royal era and opened the door to Hanoverian rule, a quiet end to a transformative life. What do you think about Queen Mary II of England? Was Mary a principled and courageous monarch? A queen who ruled with conviction, upheld the Protestant cause, and stood beside her husband through revolution and reign? Or was she a daughter torn by loyalty, overshadowed by William, estranged from her sister, and remembered more for duty than for personal power? And what about Queen Anne of Great Britain? Was Anne a resilient and devoted ruler, the woman who led Britain through union, war, and political storms, all while enduring immense personal grief? Or was she a lonely figure, shaped by illness and sorrow, her voice softened by pain, and her reign marked by loss and isolation? Were these queens the silent architects of Britain's destiny, or tragic emblems of burdened thrones? Did their strength lie in action or endurance, in reform or in restraint? History often echoes through the quiet decisions of those who ruled without fanfare. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if their stories moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more journeys into the lives that shaped our past. Thank you so much for watching.